Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this live session on the movie Regenerating Life by John Feldman. We're really so pleased to have John Feldman with us today, as well as Didi Pershouse, who is also featured in the movie, and to be co-hosting the session with Darren Rabinowitz. Some of you may know me already. I'm Adriana Cepeda. I'm the co-director and co-curator of the Film Festivalette for quite a few years now. This and Darren is the co-chair of the Environmental and Sustainability Education Special Interest Group of the Comparative International Education Society. And as you may know, the Festivalette is now in its 10th edition. And this year we're going to be completing our program in November. We've selected 8 movies from different parts of the world. And we've been focusing on peace education and in a broad, defining it in a broad sense. And in particular, in October, we focused on movies that touched on the environmental sustainability sub-theme. You may have also seen that we programmed Silent Fallout, which is on radiation pollution, and that is also a key subject that I wanted to call your attention to. But today we'll be talking about Regenerating Life, as I said, which is such a stunning movie. I mean, really quite insightful. We were talking with Darren before everybody joined about how how interesting it is that it shifts the prevailing story around climate change and really kind of refocusing where our attention should be, and not just on the issue of fossil fuels and carbon dioxide emissions, but more importantly as well, on kind of the primary cause of the issues we're having, which the movie points out to be the destruction of the system of life, the biosphere, meaning forests, the quality of soil, water cycles, among others, and the importance of working with nature to let it regenerate itself, and how that will help us also regulate the climate, a task that will take several centuries. So thank you so much, John, for this wonderful movie. And we're gonna show the trailer if I can get it to work. Let's see. Try this. We're also very interested in hearing about where people are connecting from and where they're working, their research interests, or if you could put that into the chat, that would be wonderful. Okay, it looks like this is gonna work.
Started this film about the causes and solutions to the climate crisis, I believed that the crisis was caused almost entirely by the rise in carbon emissions in the atmosphere due to our excessive burning of fossil fuels.
It's amazing. Humans, we've said, yep, CO2 going up, therefore that's a cause. We've got to be very careful. This is not the cause, this is a symptom of a disturbed system.
We humans in the so-called civilized world have the insane habit of destroying the very thing that regulates our climate, the system of life. This film explores how the forests, fields, wetlands, and oceans regulate the Earth's temperature, and what we must learn from nature to reduce global warming.
Yes, it is water that governs 95% of the heat dynamics the blue planet? Water. Simply by keeping landscapes cool and moist, we can effectively turn the greenhouse effect high down to simmer, because the thing that determines the greenhouse effect is the amount of irradiation coming from the Earth. It's a total radical shift.
There is a growing movement of people who are regenerating life.
Basic principles are to maximize the recycling of water, energy, carbon.
So the whole idea is to build diversity.
And those ecological interactions give the whole ecosystem a very high level of resilience.
Let's keep the rain on the continents as fresh water longer.
If you want to solve the problem of climate change, you just take care of the soil.
Reversing these destructive 500 years of colonialism and 200 years of the fossil fuel age means a fossil fuel-free, poison-free agriculture.
And so go to the land, come back to the land. To grow your own food gives you power.
The water and living landscapes narrative, the soil health narrative, is invaluable. Being able to build a movement in which people who are disagreeing about lots of other things can say, I want a landscape that helps my community and communities around the world have clean water, reduce flooding, be resilient to drought, have enough food, have fewer conflicts over land and water, have the beauty of diversity. Who can disagree with that?
It started.
When I started,
Okay. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guests in more detail. John Feldman, his career spans over 40 years and covers a wide range of genres. His films have won numerous international awards. He made Symbiotic Earth in 2018. This is a documentary about the maverick scientist Lynn Margulis. It's the one that we programmed in the festival, and I absolutely love that movie. Please try to find it. Since 2005, he has focused on making documentaries in the arts and sciences, including EVO, 10 Questions Everyone Should Ask About Evolution, which won the Cine Golden Eagle Parents' Choice Award. And his earlier fiction feature films include Who the Hell is Bobby Roose, which won the New American Cinema Award at the Seattle International Film Festival. And we're also very pleased to have with us Didi Pershouse. She was featured in the movie. You saw her at the end of the trailer. She's the founder of the Land and Leadership Initiative, the Center for Sustainable Medicine, and a co-founder of the Can We Rehydrate California initiative. She teaches participatory workshops helping to show the nested relationships between soil health, human health, water cycles, and climate resiliency. She also has a facilitator's guide called Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function, which has been used in over 60 countries, as well as other numerous publications. And Darren Rabinowitz, who will be co-hosting with me. Like I said, he's the co-chair of the Environmental and Sustainability Education Special Interest Group of the Comparative and International Education Society, which of course is the sponsor of this Film Festivalette. And he's also an associate researcher at the Teachers College, Columbia University Center for Sustainable Futures, which he co-founded in 2018, and a fourth-year PhD candidate studying international and comparative education at Teachers College at Columbia University. So let's get started with the questions. Please, in terms of the format for those who are joining these sessions for the first time, what we usually do is Darren and I will ask some initial questions, and then we'll open it up to the other people who have joined us who would like to participate. So please, if you have questions, do get those ready. So John, let's start with you. I know that this movie took you several years to make. It clearly, I mean, involved an enormous amount of research. You traveled to so many countries in the world. Can you tell us more about that process? You know so much about the subject already with your previous filmmaking.
Yeah, you know, the narrative that the film itself tells is very much the process that that I underwent. It's a true story. I really became first interested in regenerative agriculture and was thinking about a film on regenerative agriculture. But the more I got involved in that film and started to talk to people, I realized that that was only really a small part of the picture, and that I needed to go further. And a bunch of people from an organization called Biodiversity for a Livable Climate saw my film Symbiotic Earth, and some of those people got back to me, and I became friends with them. So I went to their website at a certain point and saw a video by Walter Jena, and it was a lecture he gave. And as I say in the film, it really blew me away, because up to that point, I really, like so many people, hadn't thought much about water and its role in the climate. And once you start to think about water, you say, oh my God, it's so obvious, right? You know, why didn't I think of it before? And that's because we are all trained to think in a certain way. And even when we study these subjects, we're led down a path which has been laid before us. And in this case, it was the whole CO2 greenhouse effect narrative. I decided that I really had to meet this guy, Walter Jena. And don't quite remember how it came about, but I don't know how it came about. But I learned that he was going to be in the area in the Northeast, giving some talks, and that if I wanted to learn more, I should contact this person, Didi Pershouse. So I did, and that really led to the fruitful relationship between me and Didi and me and Walter that started the film on its journey. But of course, that was only the beginning of the journey, and because of my work with Symbiotic Earth and Lynn Margulis, I determined from the very beginning that I had to take a holistic, big picture approach to the subject. I couldn't just focus on water, and I couldn't just focus on soil. I had to look at the whole picture. So I broke up the task and decided I really had to go interview a lot of different people. And I set up on this journey to interview these people. And then once, of course, you interview the people, and it's kind of an interesting project. I'll be brief, but when I started the film, you have to have some sort of an outline. So you make an outline, and the outline determines who you're going to visit or who try to visit. And then you go visit these people, and then once you do the interviews and learn so much, you have to throw away the outline and start it from scratch again to rebuild your story based on the material, because essentially it's the material that's going to tell the story, and my job is just structuring it and so forth. So I did that, and I traveled around a lot, and put together the movie. That's the story.
And how long did that process take?
I think it was 4 or 5 years. I finished it about a year ago or a year and a half ago. So it was about 4 or 5 years. A lot
Darren,
of it is the editing.
Darren, do you want to chime in right now? Do you have a question for John, or should I?
Yeah, I'm happy to ask a question. I guess I just first, John and Dita, I just want to appreciate the work that you do, and the movie was really informative. As someone who is working towards the end of their PhD, I think the movie was a really nice reminder of the individuals on the front lines, either doing the knowledge-based research. I'm in the social sciences, but it's also the activists who are seeing what they do in terms of changing their lifestyles and behaviors for soil regeneration and advancing biodiversity. So I just really appreciated the highlighting of these individuals and individuals like yourself. Yeah, John, I mean, I'm really curious to hear just more about your learning throughout the process of the film. And I guess in particular, something that I was quite struck by was in my research, and perhaps other education researchers will say the same, in the field of education, oftentimes there's a rhetoric about the green shift or the techno shift, whereby if we just rely on technology, we can save ourselves through technology and innovation. And I think through the movie, we clearly see that, there is so much innovation that nature already has inherently within it. And that we've perhaps taken so many steps away from like believing in that technology. And I guess I'm just curious to just hear more maybe about this quote unquote return to the technology we already have. And, more maybe about your learning throughout the process. And perhaps, Didi, if you wanted to chime in on this too, I'd be really interested to hear your answer as well, to just the technology that is already around us. And perhaps we just need to believe in what we have.
Just one more thing about my learning process. I do a lot by reading. I read a lot of material. I read scientific papers. Didi, I don't know if it was mentioned when you mentioned her bio, but Didi has a wonderful book. And there are a lot of books out there. And I've never been a big fan of technology solving any of our problems. So I didn't have to overcome that one. There were plenty of things I did have to overcome, but that was never an issue for me. I've always been a naturalist. I mean, ever since I was a kid, 13 years old or so, and really been awed by how amazing the natural world is and how it works so well, and that our crude attempts to mimic that are always crude. And so I think the challenge was to find a way to introduce what is going on in these technologies in an intelligent way, but which allowed people to see on their own from the film how inadequate these ideas were. And of course, as you know from seeing the film, I use satire a lot as a way to draw people's attention to the absurdity of some of the stuff that people have tried. And unfortunately, the list of absurdities of using technology to control nature goes well beyond the few that were mentioned in the film. Didi, you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, I put in the chat the book, I think that you were referencing, The Ecology of Care.
Right.
And for me, that was sort of my equivalent journey of John's journey with the film, was writing that book. I'd been working as a healthcare provider for 22 years. And the last 9 of that, I spent writing that book. And I always say, if I'd been in a PhD program, it would have been my PhD, but I wasn't, sadly. But it was very much of a journey. And interestingly, the first organization that I connected with was also Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. I started off looking at sustainability and healthcare and intersections between an ecological approach to healthcare and also healthcare's impact on ecological systems, negative impact, and how then that comes back around and creates health issues that we need to deal with, and that it's kind of an economic loop that's self-supporting, you know. But during the writing of that book, sort of midway through in 2011, we got hit by Hurricane Irene, or Tropical Storm Irene, in Vermont. And suddenly climate change became something real to me, that it was about water. It wasn't just about temperature. So then that became kind of my whole second wave of writing the book. And in the process of that, I met several people who were really influential in terms of helping me to see the agricultural aspect of it, which I was already interested in because I was always connecting my patients with grass-fed products and organic food and nutrient-dense food, perennial foods, but hadn't understood how key those were in terms of ecological functioning and climate, you know, the climate, and how those kinds of systems can help restore the climate and climate resilience. So some of the people that I met up with along that journey were Elaine Ingham and Christine Jones were the first two people that I met, and Peter Donovan right after that, of the Soil Carbon Coalition, who I traveled and taught with and monitored and went to ranches all over North America. So that was kind of my big education, was talking to all of those farmers and ranchers. And then pretty early on, also at a water conference at Tufts University, where some of my high school students, because I was developing curriculum around this. I'm not a high school teacher, but was doing that as sort of a way to transition my career. Some of those high school students were presenting this flour versus bread metaphor to the conference, and showing how healthy soil soaks up water the way that bread does, and unhealthy soil, it just runs right off, creating flooding and drought and wildfire risk and erosion and et cetera, et cetera. And Walter Jena was presenting at the same conference, and he was using the phrase, the soil carbon sponge, or the soil sponge. So right after that, we kind of ran up to each other and said, hey, you know, I said, hey, that's the word for what we're showing. And he said, yeah, and you're showing what I'm trying to talk about. So we connected, and it was his first trip to the States from Australia. So I ended up bringing him up to Vermont for a few days. And those conversations led to a series of conferences here that he and I put on for 4 or 5 years, and a whole speaking tour across the country, but particularly focused on California. One year, Can We Rehydrate California? And John and his son came to, I think it was the last one of those conferences, and that was where a lot of those shots of Walter were filmed, actually in this house where I am right now, my friend's house, with the all of those beautiful sky shots, et cetera, of the clouds moving and the meadow, et cetera. So we had for quite a while been hoping that a filmmaker would pick up this topic. So we were really delighted when John showed up.
Didi, can you tell us more about your work in education? How you worked with different sectors? Because I believe that you do trainings, and you just mentioned that you worked with high school students. So we'd love to hear.
Yeah, so my initial, because I didn't, you know, when I learned about regenerative agriculture and the water cycle, and even just my initial thing was soil carbon, you know, I was sort of in the more narrow climate mindset at first, of that it's just about carbon, and then pretty quickly shifted over to seeing it in a bigger context about land use. My first thing that I did was to write a series of grants to be able to write high school and FFS, FFA, Future Farmers of America, and 4-H curriculum, because I thought that way I can learn. I know the best way to
to learn is to teach. So I thought I'll be learning, I'll be tracking it down. I'll be figuring out simple ways to explain this to people of all ages. And because that's kind of my thing, is taking very complex science and talking about it in a way that is both accurate but also accessible. And so that was my initial thing, was creating this free downloadable curriculum called Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function, which surprisingly, I mean, I'm always astounded. We had counted up 60 countries that were using it, but now it's 95 countries. I mean, like, I don't understand where everybody's finding it, but they are. And then Vijay Kumar and the Andhra Pradesh Community Managed Natural Farming Initiative, which I think in the film was still using the word zero budget natural farming, but that big project in India, they found out about my work through the UN Farmer Field School program, which is a program from the FAO, the Food and Ag Organization of the UN. And Vijay also discovered Walter Yena's work through one of the videos from our initial conference. And so the folks in India invited us over to help flesh out the scientific understanding of what's going on and why that program has been so successful. That was sort of Walter's side of it. And for me to develop a field training manual for the farmers in that program, which is just literally today is probably the last day of edits before I send it off to the illustrators in Rome. So that'll be another 150 pages or so of educational materials, I think about 40 different exercises. But so there's the curriculum piece, but also for me, most of my work is teaching, and I teach through much more of a kind of Socratic method. So we'll put up a living systems framework and develop a few key questions to help people see a system through a framework to help focus our discussion. But it's very much based on reflecting on our own lived experience, reflecting on our own observations. So I try as little as possible to do as little lecturing as possible and really put people in touch with, what do you know from walking barefoot outside? What do you know from observing what happens when it rains in your area? What do we already, because I always say we know everything, almost everything we need to know about how climate and temperature works through the play that we've done as children. We just forget it as adults. We know that jumping from pavement onto grass will cool your feet, or that, pouring water on your head will cool you off. But why? Why are those true? And the same thing is true for the land. So that's the kind of teaching that I do. It's very different than the way education usually happens.
Darren, do you want to add another question before we open it up to whatever?
Yeah, I did want to ask another question, particularly to Didi. I wanted to ask you, in the movie, you have this really powerful moment, and it's also, I think, in the trailer as well, where you talk about nature preservation as a nonpartisan issue, whereby everybody can agree that a right to water and land and soil, healthy soil and quality food can be seemingly an issue that many people from different political backgrounds can rally around. And I think in this moment, I think perhaps more than ever, it's a really powerful point. And I'll just say too, in my research as well, I speak with youth climate activists, and many of them say that there's a bit of in their mind, they see that climate change can be often very political and polarizing, but nature preservation can be an issue that individuals, particularly young people, can rally around as saying this is all collectively important for our shared survival. So I'm just curious if you can talk more about that point, because I do think it's really important to talk more about what is something that we can all gather around when it comes to land management and responsible land management. That's something that's regenerative and honors biodiversity.
Yeah, very interesting point. And actually, there I'm gonna tweak the way that you're saying that a little bit, because nature preservation is actually very polarizing and has become like if you think about conservation, there are people talking about fortress conservation and green colonialism, et cetera, in terms of preserving land by wealthy people and kicking off the people who have been managing the land in order to get carbon credits. So the language of preservation and conservation has become very loaded in the global South, global North relations, particularly. However, understanding land function and land management and biodiversity and the way that biological systems regulate the climate and regenerative agriculture, like all of that, I still very much feel is something that I'm just floored by watching groups of people come together to do something and setting aside their political differences. And over the last 10 years, particularly working like in the US Midwest and places where there is a real mix, you know, on the coasts, we don't see it as much, but when you go into the Midwest or into the South, you can see this. I have one photograph of, you know, guys in like baseball caps and cowboy hats, and then, you know, rainbow bandanas, all standing around together, men and women, and you know, working out in the field together and learning from the same teachers. And the kinds of conversations that I've sat in on at those regenerative agriculture conferences are just so healing and so hopeful to see people working together. And going back to what I started saying, the tricky part is that as soon as big money gets involved, it starts splitting things. And that, you know, now even the term regenerative agriculture, people are arguing, or, you know, is it my term or your term? And does it mean no-till and using lots of chemicals, you know, or does it mean like whole systems, putting all the soil health principles into effect and being creative about it? So, and it's given me a lot of perspective in this election cycle, you know, here on the East Coast, people, you know, the amount of disdain that the kind of coastal liberals have for anybody who's not voting liberal. I've been saying, you know, that's the first sign of a marriage breaking up, is disdain. And we need to get rid of that tone and try to understand that there's all kinds of reasons why people are voting all over the map. And it's not necessarily because they like Trump or whatever. There's a whole cultural thing that we have trouble understanding. But regenerative agriculture is a really interesting piece now because when RFK joined the Trump campaign, he brought a lot of farmers, a lot of regenerative agriculture people in that direction who might have voted the other way, or voted third party. So it actually may be one of the key issues as to why the election went the way that it went. Because he's been meeting with, you know, he's planning to put like Joel Salatin in as one of his big USDA people. And, you know, like there's some of our big regen ag pioneers are very likely going to be working in the USDA. So that's one benefit to the way the election went. So, but really interesting crossover point.
Darren, I could add one thing to that. Didi said something to me once that has stuck, and that is, you can have the whole climate change conversation from beginning to end without ever mentioning carbon. And, you know, that's really amazing, and it's possible. I could have done it in the film, but I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. That's a great sum up. So we're going to open it up now to questions from others who joined. Does anybody want to ask a question of John or Didi? You can do that in the chat, or you can turn on your mic or your camera as you prefer. The session is being recorded.
Hi, can I go?
Yes, please.
Yes, John, thank you so much for this movie, and I wanted to get back to it. I found it incredibly hopeful. Actually, you know, we're at a pretty bleak place in the world now with not only climate, but wars, genocides, risk of nuclear war, elections, for some. And I think the problem with the bleak news on climate is some of us tend to think, look, it's all over. We've done it. we've screwed up the planet. But so to see this was incredibly hopeful. I'm really pleased you included all the material you did, particularly the carbon stuff and the critique of green growth. And I'm thinking about that particularly from the way the education sector is dealing with the climate debate. There's this whole greening education thing coming from UNESCO particularly, and the UN. The strength of the private lobby within the UN organizations at the moment around the whole sustainable development agenda, not only climate, is really significant, and of course it's twisting it quite significantly. So I think that's really important to have that in there. So I think the messages for education policy generally are really significant, but I think the real strength of it as well is the strong emphasis on ground up community-based action that could be taken. That was amazing to see, and of course reaffirming the values of indigenous communities and deep knowledge. I think that has been lost essentially as the world has become corporatized, colonized, and subject to imperial whims. But so that was fabulous. I think there's so much in it. I'm hoping that you will have, like as you did with Symbiotic Earth, have this wonderful book. And I looked at the website. You've made a start with that, but I think there's so much material here that could be used. So I have a lot of practical questions about how that could be made more available. I see that the closed captions and the text comes up quite nicely on the movie. It would be wonderful to be able to get that to be translated, and I couldn't. Sometimes you can do a kind of automatic translation on the text as it comes up, but that would make this accessible for Russian, particularly that I'm thinking of, but Spanish and other languages, where there'd be great interest in the movie. But thank you so much for it, and of course, beautifully put together. Never too long with the talking heads. Always just enough action, wonderful, some wonderful graphics, some great movements. I really enjoyed that and loved the music at the start. I wondered if a certain composer was involved with the opening music. So those are my comments.
First of all, it is available in several languages, and we are working to get it available in more languages. Those are probably listed on our website. I want to add something about the hopeful context of the film. Obviously, when you look around now, and it's really hard to maintain a sense of hopefulness as the forests continue to be plundered and as the land is just destroyed all over. So I think about that a lot. And one of the things that I've been thinking about now, and I did put a little bit on my website about that, is that when we think about the huge task, for instance, of rebuilding forests along the west coast of the United States in order to reduce fires and to reduce floods and so forth, when we think about that, and we think about the fact that it's going to take generations, in a minimum 200-300 years to have a forest that's capable of doing that function again, it really seems daunting. But there's another way to look at that, and that is that just by starting the process of eco-restoration, wherever it is, just by starting, you begin to see improvements. So every day along the way is an improvement. And the idea of having a task and thinking that you're not going to have success until you finish your task, like building a building, you're not done until it doesn't really apply so much in this situation, Because when you start the forest, when you start to bring back the water, and that's a key component, bringing back the water to the land with streams and so forth, as soon as you start, it'll be better. So that's my source of hope right now.
I wanted to just jump in there for a minute because I think one of the challenges that we're facing right now is that there is actually kind of an anti-forest narrative that's growing. You know, there's stuff about like, oh, the darker trees in the north are actually absorbing too much heat, or without looking at, or National Geographic did a whole issue on forests as shade without ever mentioning transpiration, or the biotic pump or rain creation or any of the rest of it. That's not anti-forest, but it was like, wow, that's kind of amazing that they missed that one. And then in California, apparently in LA, they're going around and cutting trees, neighborhood trees in the city, for both in terms of fire risk, but also they'd say that like criminals are hiding behind trees. I mean, it's just kind of incredible, like the reasons that people come up with to cut down trees. And I think one of the best things that we can do is to start tracking temperature in areas. And I have a project, if anyone wants to pick it up, we've sort of talked through it and semi-designed it, of taking those infrared thermometers. I think John shows that in the film, and installing them at bus stops throughout cities with a little, an interface so that people can see different areas of the city and try, test and point it at the transpiring leaf. Maybe there's a little window box that you can water so that it's transpiring, and try that. Point it at the pavement, have an ambient temperature, tracking things, and just have something for people to do, a little tiny science museum at bus stops all over the world. That I think people will pretty quickly put the pieces together and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? The Guardian just had a wonderful article looking at the temperature differences between like botanical gardens and rain gardens, et cetera, and the surrounding neighborhood. And it was like 5 degrees Celsius, which I guess is like 9 degrees Fahrenheit difference in the air temperature. Not the surface temperature would be 40 degrees different. And interestingly, the top 2 or 3 were all things that have consistent water at the root zone. So the botanical gardens, where people are trying very hard to keep those specific tree species healthy, it's a little bit different than a city park. Rain gardens and wetlands. Anyway, that kind of thing, I think it's these temperature oases, and also really looking at like what didn't burn in a fire. I don't think, is Linda Gibbs's video part of the movie? Did that ever get in there? So you're muted, John. Sorry.
Yes, her studio is part of the movie. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. So stories like that, collecting just even on a Google Doc of like every time there's a fire, have people say what didn't burn, and starting to piece that together as to like, actually it's not what we, some of the sort of accepted, what is that word? The
wisdom.
Huh? Well, the accepted wisdom is not actually wise, right? So looking at reality rather than our assumptions.
But the most basic thing is, from an education point of view, that most people don't know that trees cool the area around themselves. That basic idea that trees cool. And I think if more people just realize that trees are our first defense against global warming, that would make a huge difference, that little bit of information.
And I think the Miyawaki mini forest movement, has a lot of potential to get to what you were talking about before, John, about like, while we're waiting for the bigger forests to regrow in a diverse way, we can create a lot of diversity and a lot of cooling through sort of micro versions of that, and that bring a lot of joy to people to be able to see that as well.
Right.
Great. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to add? We're going through flooding right now where I live. It's
Right.
in Bogota. There's been a lot of rain, and it's not our rainy season, and it's causing quite a bit of issues, quite a few issues. And there are a lot of trees here. But it's so challenging because it's also interconnected, no? So even if some people, do something here, but others don't do it there, then it all like and some of the places that are trying to do some of this may also still be affected because others aren't doing what they should be doing. And
Right.
I think that's a really important point, is that we need to start thinking about sort of rain diplomacy. There are different words coming up now around that, it's not just enough to have to, like here in Vermont, we have a lot of forest regeneration, but then we end up having like huge amounts of rain here because not everybody around us has that, right? And so we end up getting, it's all precipitating here. And we need to think not just about even our own continent, but there's now research showing that rain generates some more, in China or Europe or Africa, et cetera. So it's an invitation to have more conversation, more diplomacy, et cetera, around rain formation, water movement, well, all of those pieces, putting them all together.
yeah, I was also thinking about how important it is to infuse all of this into curriculum like you've done, but in schools more widely and in families and communities. And I was thinking a lot about my son as I was listening to you. He's 5 years old, and he loves plants. He's like completely in love with flowers, and he knows when they're budding, when they're gonna wither. That he keeps count of how many are gonna grow. I mean, he's he's surprising us. We don't know. I mean, there's a gardening kind of vein in my husband's family, but he's only 5 and he's doing. So I try to tell him about trees and carbon and how important they are, that trees are our best friends, that you have to take care of them, etc. And I try to tell him all these things, and he really listens. He's absorbing all of this. And he's having a hard time going to school. We're trying to figure out why. And one day he was kind of upset about going to school. He just wanted to stay home and just play with the plants, and he does all these things with soil anyway. And he was kind of upset about going to school. And I knew when he'd go to school, he wasn't going to be connected with any of this that he wanted, right? Because he does other things there. He's inside. He has, it's not connected with the earth or even though it's a very green school. Anyway, and so he says to me, he says, "What's more important, Mom? School or a flower?" And somehow he's understanding that he needs more of this, and he's not getting enough of it at school. He wants to keep exploring these relationships, water, what happens when you do, the natural world. He wants that. He wants to understand. And so anyway, I just think that we thought that it was very important to pick the movie for the festival for all of these reasons.
And that's why, the education should start at the lowest level, when they haven't yet been brainwashed by the system. And, I remember, planting a seed in a milk carton in school and all these things that we did. And I think that schools still do it, but just bringing that into the lower grades would be so important. And of course, it's important to carry it on into the other grades, an education about how the living systems work. But the kids, they get it right away. Like Didi was saying, it's not complicated until someone all of a sudden decides to complicate it for them.
And it's interesting because if you look at like next generation science standards, et cetera, photosynthesis, transpiration, cooling, like so much of that. And like you said, just planting things and how do plants work, et cetera. That is all kind of pre-sixth grade or so. And then it's like we don't carry it through to say, how does this intersect with the history of the world and with wars and with climate and with et cetera. It's like considered kind of baby science. And we don't bring it into like the bigger conversation of like how does photosynthesis and transpiration and soil structure, et cetera, how do those play out over time in the larger systems that we're studying? What are the social implications of it? What are the historical implications of it? What are the mathematical implications of it, right? It's a real invitation. And I mean, the next generation science standards are actually hoping that teachers will put together systems thinking. Like they really are very exciting if you look at them, except for that there's some stuff around like genetic engineering is also being taught and put in there by Monsanto, et cetera. But so there's an invitation for it, but we also know that most teachers these days do not have time to develop their own curriculum. They're so overwhelmed. So it's a place, it's a kind of an opening for that. I also want to just give a shout out to Kat Buxton, who John knows, who's here in the Upper Valley of Vermont and New Hampshire, who has been doing work with various elementary schools in our area and has developed an incredible composting project that is now, she's gotten a big federal grant for the Super Compost project of setting up these systems in 22 schools and getting teachers to integrate gardening and compost and systems thinking about soil and water into the schools here. And so she's someone, and again, most of us, it's interesting that we don't have a degree in education. We're just getting in there and doing it. And I think it's often the people who are not head down trying to deal with the ins and outs of the classroom that really actually need to pick this up and work on it to give offer something to the teachers who are so much on the front lines.
There's a comment here from Christian in the chat saying, in the young years, I think what we should be doing is planting a garden, living with cooking, experience home care, walk in the woods, splash in water, climb trees.
Yeah. Thank you. That's well said. Yeah.
Yeah, and
the other thing I've seen here in Vermont, which was one of the benefits of COVID, was that in a number of our local schools here, every single school, because the schools are in forests, every school had, and every classroom had an outdoor classroom with circle of stumps and a fire pit, and after COVID, they're still using those. They're still going out and doing a lot of their work outside. So that's a really nice side effect.
Yeah,
thank you, Norma. I'm looking at Norma's.
Yeah, Norma has
yeah.
She also has a comment. I am interested in intergenerational learning, bringing young children before they are damaged by school together with elders who still hold the wisdom, and anyone else who is interested. If you're interested in this, please contact me. norma.rudolph@tuny.fi.
Yeah, Norma, I put my email in there if you want to connect with me. Yeah, send me an email.
Yeah, because I was listening to everyone and thinking about my son. I just was thinking how important it is that, all of this the experience, like Christian was saying, and also I think also some systems thinking that in a simple way, it's not that difficult, is so important. I mean, really at the level of reading and writing, or even I would say even more, sorry. I mean, it's really something so basic, right? It's something that we need. And I'm not seeing it as much as I would want. And so hopefully that will change. Does anybody else want to add anything before we close?
Just a quick comment about the outside and young children. I did something recently on the forest schools movement. It's kindergartens outside for kids, which is growing. But the one we looked at was one in just outside Zurich in Switzerland. And these kids are outside every day of the year, no matter what the weather is, right through the snow. And it's quite incredible because they are healthier, apparently, than other kids. All the schools that receive them remark about how confident they are. And there were so many stories about kids that are hyperactive or withdrawn. When they started the kindergarten, the element of play, of being out with other kids, was so good for them. And also, the experiences, the relationships between the kids seemed to be better, less bullying, less competitiveness, more supportiveness. So I was just thinking, there's so much has been written about how important outdoors are for children, but also for developing a sense of a love for the environment, and how important that is for forming a basis for all knowledge later on. It's hard to think of how we limit kids' learning by sticking them in a small space with manufactured toys, right? I remember the outside experience that someone mentioned of playing with sticks and stones and pretending they were all sorts of things, and having the most wonderful time where your imagination runs riot. But I think being outside with other kids forces you to make your own world in ways that you don't do when it's made for you. So I think that kind of very, very primeval almost engagement with the environment from a very young age is crucial for foundational learning.
There's also research that has shown that the one of the best predictors of ethical behavior later in life is early experiences of awe and wonder, which, where do we get those? Almost always outside. Oh, Q, you're muted if you were saying something.
Not to be confused with shock and awe.
I've also heard several people say that, young kids, probably your daughter's age, or was it a son, that are naturally systems thinkers. At a young age, we're all systems thinkers, but when we go through the educational system, that we kind of lose that, or it's drummed out of us. And we enter into this linear didactic type of thinking. So any way to preserve that is wonderful.
Does anybody else want to add anything more before we close?
I just wanted to ask something, if it's hello.
Okay. Last question.
Everybody.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, we can. There's so many nice things we can talk about. It's a wonderful film, of course. It's the whole issue is really great, and it makes us hopeful, and it shows the way. And sometimes it's surprising that, speaking with people, that they do not put things together at all, and they do not understand why there's no rain. They feel that there's nothing we can do. There's, if we don't, like here in Greece where we are this year, there has been dramatic reduction of rainfall, especially in our area there, and everybody, the farmers are beginning to understand that they're in trouble, but they don't know where to look. They don't know what to do. Nobody tells them. And I speak a lot with people in the community, and I'm out there, doing things, and it's a permanent kind of discussion. In the end, we were, we go out in a bar at night, and They say, okay, Nikos, we don't talk about the water tonight. Okay, not talk about the water. So, yeah, but they enjoy it. And suddenly, my biology background has brought about a big change. We know why this matters. We know why, after specializing so much, everybody in our education, like you have been discussing, uh, suddenly we can put things together. I feel sometimes that I've wasted a lifetime because I have done so much, but now I realize why I've done it, and now I realize what I know what I would like to do for the rest of my years. And anyway, and it's all part of the education that we've all received. It's true. But I had just had a question about the film. I haven't asked you, John, uh, although it's not it's a simple question, really. What happens, like, when you see a film, you enjoy it so much, and you like the characters in the film. There's always this question: what happened afterwards? I mean, what are all these people doing? How are they doing? Are they still strong? Are they the farmers, for example, that you showed in the film that we saw? I mean, it's really one. You don't know what. I watched the trailer now, and I felt like I was really deeply moved, like I was the first time. And I've watched the film time and time again. We've had discussions here in Greece about it. We've taken it around places. We're still going to. There are other appointments coming up, and it still makes you really emotional. So I was wondering, what are all these people doing? Have they lost their courage? Perhaps some of them. Are they still going on? Are they really striving, struggling, fighting against whatever is around them, main narratives and so on?
Well, of course, everybody is different. But I have found that some of the, and I don't want to say who exactly, um, some of the fiercest advocates and for this point of view, and really the people who I was so inspired by, have become really tired. Fighting against a brick wall really does wear you out. Um, and that's a shame. But then there's a whole new generation of people who are fighting, and new activists. So, on the whole, I think things are getting better. I think that people are more and more people are catching on, and more and more people are working towards the common goal of shifting the thinking to the environmental damage. And one of the things is that, so many people have been fighting for the environment, and fighting for the rights of nature, as it were. And even biodiversity is a big part of the UN agenda. And I'd like to say to them, even though you didn't know it at the time, you are on the front lines of the climate crisis. They think that the environment is secondary and carbon is the front lines, but really they have been on the front lines of the climate crisis all this time. And the fight to save environments, and the fight for even individual species, which it's come down to in some cases. This is, really where it's got to continue to happen, and so forth. Also, I wanted to say to Hugh that there is a study guide coming out, and we've been working at it for a while, and so I'll keep you appraised of that.
And one other thing to Nikos, that Vijay Kumar in India, the project that project in India that is highlighted, they are now over 1 million farmers. I don't know how many there were at the time of the film, but there are over 1 million farmers in Andhra Pradesh doing natural farming, and they are bringing that work into various countries in Africa, working together with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa and other organizations. That movement is really spreading. He just got a big international prize. He was highlighted at the UN Food Summit. So that work is really getting out there, and that's very exciting because it's such a picture of what can be done when a lot of small people small farms, smallholder farmers get together to change a region. So yes, and the AFSA, Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, is a great organization, Norma. It's they're doing tremendous work on agroecology and against a lot of political pushback, because there's so much of the land in Africa is not tenured, that there's a lot of land grabbing going on for carbon credits that is not doing what's needed in terms of regeneration. So,
And also, VJs has a team now that is translating the film and also dubbing it. So if
great.
that happens, it'll quadruple our audience
Wow.
in a minute.
Yeah.
And hopefully, also people will continue to share the movie. I'm happy to hear, Nikos, that you're doing that in Greece. And the movie will continue to be available on our website until November 15th. So please do help us to continue to distribute it. We've extended the time to see it until then. And then after that, it's also available online. And you have to
Yeah,
pay
if you just come to our website, hummingbirdfilms.com. There are links to where it's available to watch.
Thank you so much to everyone. You've given us so much to think about. Thank you again, John, for this
Thank
wonderful
you. Thank you.
for all of your work. Great having this space with you. Thank you to everybody that joined.